Okay, now let's see, can we go back to the lecture? Okay, right. Do let me know if you can't hear me, because I'm not altogether sure that that it's using my earphones as opposed to my computer. Okay, but everything looks good. I just need my doofer. Hey, everything really is working. Did anyone bring over the... yes, they did. Okay, register. Thank you for those of you who handed in the reflection pieces. I will get them back to you by next week. No, it's a process of doing this. This is how we learn. Okay, hi. Yes, we are. Yeah. Okay, so I put out another reading for you just because I thought that the Michelle's discussion of oligarchy was a bit more polemical and a little less substantial. Okay, so I put out the Leach paper as well, asking what is this oligarchy? Okay. It's not examinable. I mean, okay, for a start, the way that your exams work is that your assignment, your class assignment, you then rework it at home and you send it in, all right? But the material, the Leach is not examinable at all. So you don't have to refer to it. It's not one of those that I say, it's on your list, you must show me that you've read these. You don't have to show me that you've read Leach, okay? But I do think that it would help you just get some sort of grasp on how you tell, on what basis are we saying oligarchy or not oligarchy? All right. Has anyone had a look at it? No. Okay. Can I assume that you've read Marie? Okay. One person's read Marie. Marie was the other reading. It was Michelle's, and Marie, who was also, Marie looks at oligarchy in Cosatu and says, is it on? Yeah. Okay. So that's where we're going ultimately, is to apply this to him. But I'm not actually going to cover him. So hopefully we will, in the course of this, you will be able to bring up that paper by Marie. Okay, so just to go back to last week, to remind yourself that one of the reasons, well, okay. So if you go back to last week, we spoke about democracy, all right? And we went on a little bit to discuss some of the criticisms. Okay, so to look at these in more detail, this is from Albro. Yeah? Primary reason why everyone critiques this is because of the confusion around rationality and efficiency. The argument is that Weber is assuming that rationality itself is the most efficient way of operating, when in fact people point out that it's not, that there's some, because of the rationality of bureaucratic organization, there's some very unfortunate side effects. One of these being that the rules that are there in order to achieve the outcome, achieve the organization's objectives, become something in itself that people follow. So for example, Carl van Holt did a study in, I think it's a 2010 study in one of our state hospitals of the operation of the bureaucracy. And he was, the one example that he gives is the nurses. The job of the nurses is to look after a large number of patients. So, and they have to continually monitor these. And that's why you have the sheet of paper at the back of the bed. Okay, so every half hour or every 20 minutes or whatever it is, you have to go and take all the vital signs and write all of this down. The purpose being that you know very quickly when something changes, you're aware of it immediately. Okay, but in a context where there are not enough nurses and large numbers of patients, it turns out that you actually can't visit and do that kind of paperwork on a regular basis. So what happens is that nurses do their shift, and then at the end of the shift, they do their charts. Okay. So, and that's it. And it's accepted. It's almost a blind eye to the fact that they're not doing their charts, because, you know, all nurses know that they just don't have the time. They are running from patient to patient. They don't have the time. So it's like, yeah, but before you go home, make sure you do your charts. Okay. So that bureaucratic rule that is meant to, it's a means to achieve an end of monitoring patients and being able to step in as soon as you see something going wrong. The rule itself becomes the end rather than the means that it's meant to be. Okay. The other, well, and linked to that, yeah, forms of impersonality itself is that you can't respond to people because you have to do these rules so very, very objectively. And it's almost, in some cases, it's if you're going to be impersonal, it's a lot easier to do your job. As soon as you actually hear about that person's circumstances, then it becomes difficult. And comments have been made that, well, perhaps bureaucracy is effective in some kinds of organizations for some kinds of objectives, but perhaps when it comes to social welfare and health and education, it's not very useful at all. Okay, and that impersonality means that people can't actually respond to what the people they're meant to be serving are needing. Okay. And then Blau points out that it is that very rigorous keeping to the rules and not moderating your behavior to fit a situation that makes those organizations in fact less effective. And he gives the example of suppose you'd call it town planning departments, where the town planning department has got a number of forms that people have to fill out in order to become recognized as one of the approved builders on a housing scheme. Okay. And although bribery is definitely not allowed and is frowned upon, what the officials, what those, you call them clerks, what those officials found was that if one of the building people coming forward to be registered did try and make a bribe, they would take the bribe and they would share it amongst themselves. And then they would use the bribe as a way to keep that builder in step. So it was a case of, we're going to report you. We let you off that time because you tried to offer us a bribe and blah, blah. probably they didn't take it. But the offering of the bribe becomes a way that they back up their power. Okay, that without any actual means to enforce decisions, they take advantage of a context and adapt so that they can actually wield something which will then act as a stick. Yeah. Okay. You can think also in terms of this, you can think of the tender process and the how that gets through bureaucracies, that with that impersonality, your job as a clerk, at some point, those tenders have come through and you are told they've come through. Whether what procedures they've gone through is none of your business, okay? That's the other person who's doing another job. Your sphere of influence is only in one particular area. And while you may know that this particular company is a complete con, you've seen their work before, you're aware that this person doesn't actually have any skills or doesn't actually have a legal company, but that impersonality allows you, and in fact, there's no way that you can then stop and say, well, no, something's going wrong here. In order to stop and say something's going wrong, you've got to out yourself, and you've got to question that line of authority and that separation of duties, that another department makes this decision, that it's not up to you to vet decisions. You don't have the time. It's not your work. It's not your place. You're right. And that impersonality helps people, well, makes it easier, I suppose, to overlook that. You are required to overlook it, okay? To ignore your own ideas, to trust your own judgment. And then Parsons, Talcott Parsons, he's an interesting character, but not very well, actually. He is still quite influential in some areas. Parsons says, well, you set yourself up immediately for a conflict within a bureaucracy because you have hierarchy, okay, and positions of authority that are by post. And then you have this constant pressure on people to update their qualifications, to get educational qualifications and records of that. Okay, that's how you're going to get promotion through the system. But when you do that, you're saying the person with the authority is also the person who's the expert. Okay, and yet you're setting it up to actually be able to draw a distinction between expert and job, or to say there's expert and there's the post with authority, and which are, are they both equal? In which case, who do I listen to? All right. Come on. Huh. Okay. Really. So, this, I think, is a far more, we haven't actually changed. Okay. The reply from the Barbarians is that his argument was never that bureaucracy was efficient because it was rational, okay? His argument is that rationality is simply a clearly expressed argument for why you are doing things in a particular way. It says, it looks at a situation and says, okay, we want that outcome. This is the objective that this organization has to fulfill. In order to have that objective, and you can do it at every level, you've got to have processes to go through to get that outcome. It's that identifying what you want at the end, and then using that to say, right, we're going to use these means to get there. That is the rationality of it that he regards as being technically superior. That is not on the basis of someone had a dream that this was the way to do it. Although in practice it's not open to question and to discussion, in theory it's based on solid reasoning, okay? It may not be the best, but it's an attempt to find an effective way to do this that is based on something that isn't emotional, it isn't particular to people, to one person rather than another. Yeah. And it was, for Weber, it's that similarity to the legal procedure, the rationality of the legal procedure that says, okay, so you have doctors and you have patients. Well, how are we going to regulate the relationship between them? Doctor has expertise, patient has confidentiality issues. We are going to set up a contract, what doctors can do, what they can't do, the rights of a patient, okay? That contractual understanding of how people interact. You could put the same thing on a contractual understanding of your position here and my position. Okay, we have our roles very, very clearly demarcated. If you've ever rented a property, you know that there are very clear contractual regulations on how we interact, how that relationship takes place, what your rights are in a particular circumstance, what your duties are. Okay, that's, yeah. Yes. Yes, that's it. You sign a contract with rules and regulations if you get employed. There we go. You have to apply for leave. You identify who your next and your authority line is identified. Yeah. And when we were when I was testing out the other room, I had to get the security guard to open for me. And he was saying to me, but why are you part-time? Why aren't you full-time? And just the other day, I got because I'm teaching the full-time students this term as well, I got an email specifying what is required of a WITS employee. You have to do one publication a year minimum, and that is university-wide, and there are additional requirements within every school. But it's that, and they very quickly, within a month of my appointment, go, this is the base expectation that we have of you. Your school, your department might have other expectations, but this is what you need. So it's very clearly setting out what is required, and yeah. And I personally, I don't think that you can fulfill that kind of a research and publishing regiment at the same time as the teaching load that they have. I don't see how they do it. Well, I do see how they do it. They never stop working, which is just, yeah, I have a life. Yeah, so for Weber, that's rationality of bureaucracy he regards as technically superior because it is based on some attempt to find an effective means of doing it, a reasoned attempt to get an outcome. And what's more, that it's impartially applied, that like a body of law, it's applied within its own framework. That even when there are challenges or things that needs that come up that haven't been accounted for, the overall structure of the bureaucracy, the way that it operates, points you in some directions rather than others. It already gives you a sense of where you should go to find the answer to how to now deal with this new situation. Okay. For example, what other department do you have to make contact with? All right. Yeah, the name situation. Yes. Okay. Yeah. All right. And in fact, Weber's intention, he's not arguing for and yes, his background is in law, and he is commenting on administration practices and processes, but his intention wasn't to tell people how to organize themselves. His intention was to explain why rationality was the dominant form of authority in this modern society, and how that authority is expressed, is put to work. Okay, how that authority exercises itself through bureaucracies. Okay, so he's making a claim about changing form, changes in what's considered legitimate in the way that authority is exercised. And he's saying with modern society, there's a great, it's not a complete movement, but there is an overwhelming dominance of that rationality as being the basis for legitimate authority. Okay. And you can see why, yeah, it has a nice association with democracy. Yeah. Oh, okay. This really isn't working. Ah, it is working, just slowly. Okay. All right. Then there's also a critique on the basis that he is magicking away, sort of wiping away the need to be concerned about our social values, the culture in which this or any organization operates. That yes, you can identify these rational rules and procedures, and you can set it down very clearly, and everyone can have very strictly and clearly marked lines of authority. But in fact, how those rules are interpreted and the attitude of that person towards those rules and towards the authority system itself shape how they're actually going to implement them. Okay. Again, with Carl van Holt's example, that, where am I here? Okay. I'm talking about this area here, that social values shape your orientation to rules and consequent implementation, and that you interpret and apply rules in a particular social and political context. You yourself come with social and political beliefs, ideals, value systems, experiences. Now, in Carl van Holt's study, what he was finding was that when people higher up in the bureaucratic organization of the hospital made incorrect decisions and people below them knew that they were incorrect decisions, and the study was done in 2010, and it goes back and says initially this was because people would support an incorrect decision because otherwise it would be siding with the racist white manager who was there, who they couldn't deal with, they didn't get on with. So it was a case of, in this instance, the well-being and the future of this hospital in terms of everyone getting on together, okay, and in terms of us having a nice, pleasant way of life, is to get rid of the white bureaucrats. For heaven's sake, don't get rid of your own people. Okay? Now, you cannot deny that in South Africa, there is racial tension. It is, to try and pretend that it isn't there is impossible. It's there. Yes. Hmm. We're from the past. We're from the past. We're racist. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that it was a case of seeing someone take a decision that is not 100% correct, but when you put on the spot, you don't call them out. Yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never called out a coworker. Have you called out a coworker and reported them to a boss? Have you? Brave. Coworkers are? They will throw you under the bus, yes. They will. But when you're in that situation, this is what he's saying. He's saying the individual person is who you think about. The individual person comes in from a particular context. They come in with social political views. They come in with previous experiences and they make a decision. Okay? That is how it happens in practice. The fact that your co-workers will throw you under the bus, yes, I know that. I know that I might get blamed for this. I'll try find other underhanded ways of pointing out that it's not my decision. But me personally, no, I don't think that my allegiance, well, in this case anyway, certainly in Wits, I'm not a permanent employee, so my allegiance is not to the overall, to the letter of the institution. Okay. Mm. 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 Yes. Yeah. I mean, particularly when someone is good for the organization, for the ultimate objectives. The fact that they make a wrong decision doesn't necessarily, maybe they're lousy at that particular, counting the cost of power or whatever. But they have other strengths and you make that decision. There's no way that you come in without that history, without that. Yeah, I mean, we're human beings and yes. And you don't want to call someone above you an idiot. And you often, you are often put in positions when you regard them as being an idiot, but you decide not to say anything because it's just not worth it, right? You're not going to get any support from higher up, if you call out someone, for example. Yeah. Yeah. And that individual is told, this is the way that you make your views heard. We're not telling you to shut up, but you bring it up in the proper procedures within the party. Yeah. But also the party's objective and the individual's objective might be different. Yes. You're part of that party and it's the system of representation. Yeah. We elect a party at some levels, not a person. Yeah. Okay. The other interesting thing here, departments or teams or divisions may set up their own goals in conflict to the organization as a whole. And this again is when in a spirit of camaraderie, you start competing with another department, and it's all fun and games and everything else, but it can actually undermine the way that you work together. And that does happen. One of the arguments that Michelle's brings forward on that is that he says once people are in positions of power, there's a swap of the goals. And we probably have been actually talking about that right now, where the goals of the organization change. You substitute, you say, well, I need to stay here. I have something to give. So I'm going to make decisions which make sure I stay in a position of power. Okay. or there are a whole lot of racist people out there who are going to take over this organization unless we make sure that they don't. Okay, again, it's an objective, it's a goal that is not it's not necessarily in it's potentially in conflict, in direct conflict with the objectives of the organization, but it's almost like a goal substitution, that you have the emergence of other goals that people have that are quite often also not done with any malicious intent, you know. And Friedrich, whose comment is that Weber can carry on all he wants about how bureaucracy is an objective, impersonal, standard application of rules, that it's consistent with democracy because it treats everyone equally. And he says, yes, you can say that, but ultimately, no. Even a bureaucrat is still responsible for their actions. They are never just implementing a rule. Okay. And, you know, there again, it's what you feel. You know, you take decisions in your life, but you don't then say, well, it wasn't up to me, I couldn't. You say, I didn't because of XYZ reason. You know, we seldom say, I couldn't, it's not my job. Okay. We say something more than that to ourselves. Right. Okay, and the reply from the barbarians is that he is giving a cultural analysis, that he is very much talking about this culture, the values that we have, the kinds of authority that we listen to. And he's saying, yes, they are, you know, we're not saying it's the only kind of culture, this bureaucratic rationalization, but he's saying this is how us as a society, this is what we are believing. He's saying, I am exactly doing that. I'm not ignoring culture. I'm saying to you, the culture is changing. The way that we understand what is legitimate authority is becoming more and more based on technical qualifications, on calculable costs. How much does it cost? How much is the profit? On defendable means and ends. Okay. It's not based on values. We're not, well, not that we're not allowed, we are discouraged from discussing values at every step of the way. You know, we're told people have different value systems, you should respect different value systems, rather than actually talk about it. We are told that it is better to take a very abstract view and try and accommodate as many different views as possible. Okay? The fact that there's, you know, the fact that we may look at it and say this is wholly unfair, that for most of us isn't a reason why you can challenge it. You know, I mean, I don't know. Common story with my parents, it's always a case of the world isn't fair, life isn't fair. And it's said as a statement of fact that life isn't fair, so don't worry, don't try and make it fair. Okay? And it's that our sense of responsibility is increasingly being reduced to just our jobs, you know, just what we say on that job. So while, yeah, we go home and we talk to ourselves and we do defend what we did to ourselves. At the same time, we are being encouraged to act to the letter of the law, to turn a blind eye, to do your job and don't worry about someone else's position. Okay. So it is exactly that bureaucracy is in Weber's argument, the dominant form of organization based on the dominant form of legitimate power, which is that rational, legal, rational power. Okay, he's not saying that the other forms of power don't exist. There's still traditional power. Within families, there's still traditional power. Within governments, there's still traditional power. England has a queen. Okay, they got a House of Lords that is simply there by birth. Okay? That's hereditary power. Charismatic power still works. Oh, okay. Charismatic power still operates, yes. People legitimately exercise authority because they are charismatic individuals. People listen to them. People aren't beaten over the head to listen to them. People freely decide to listen to them. They are persuaded by the argument because that person has a charismatic personality. Okay? So it's not to say those other forms of authority don't exist, or the legitimacy of those doesn't exist. It still does exist, just that the overwhelmingly dominant form of legitimate authority is this rationality, this legal rational authority. Okay, that's not looking good. Okay, people online, are you still seeing the slides?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Are you hearing? Do you have any comments, any questions?
No, not at all. Can you, if I speak, you can hear me, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. No. Everything's smooth. Like it's perfect, actually.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Brilliant. Okay, it's not really. Yeah, we have a flickering screen, but
the only thing I will say is if someone in the class asks a question, we can't hear, so I must rely on your answer to know what the question is. But
okay.
To me, yeah, I mean, if you repeat the question, then we might know, but honestly, that's the only issue.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that's I have the problem because I forget that I'm wearing earphones. So it's like, okay, so the question that came up was the only thing that they are not hearing is the questions that the class asks. And similarly, you're not hearing the question that is asked to me. So yeah, if I do forget, please just tell me to repeat the question or repeat the comment that was made.
Sure.
Great. I can't believe that we're having problems here. Okay. All right. Let's just hope this goes well. Oh, come on. Okay. Jeez. Okay, right. Okay. I can't believe this. We're losing the screen now. Oh, well, okay. Okay, so in summary, and this is a summary from the last 2 weeks, that what Weber is saying is that bureaucracy is the dominant expression of this legal rational authority. It is an inevitable development alongside democracy because democracy is based on this principle of equality. Bureaucracy is what came in and got rid of the hereditary titles. okay, that you ruled because you were born into that position. It was that democracy overturned. That you now ruled because you had the support of the majority of the people. It wouldn't have made sense to have hereditary authority, that traditional authority, continue to be the basis on which decisions were made and laws implemented. That bureaucratization is stimulated by administrative expansion. Okay. Culture, economy, technology, of course, also play a role in this, and they all reinforce each other. That it is technically superior to all other systems of administration and domination. And this is where Weber is really worthwhile reading. Every year I come to this and I say, oh God, I don't want to read Weber. But seriously, every time I read it, I find new things in it. He's actually a remarkably interesting writer, generally. And he does, he's quite able to point out that it's a very powerful tool of domination. If people get to control that, if it does fall into the wrong hands, okay, it is tremendously difficult to withstand that power. He points out that countries these days, they're not invaded, they have coups. You got to take over the bureaucracy. And if you think of, the storming of palaces and storming of TV stations, you get hold of your communications infrastructure of a country and you have immense power. Similarly, home affairs. Yeah. But at the same time, while it is aligned with democracy, at the same time, it does create a new layer of elites. That is always going to be a tension between elected representatives and the bureaucracy. Okay? There's a desire, and there's good argument that democracy is rule of the people, but these officials and bureaucratic structures are not elected. They are incredibly powerful if they control and centralize that power, and they have very little. They don't have the checks and balances that election has. They can't easily be removed from their position. And that an elected government is always going to want to be more powerful than a bureaucracy. A bureaucracy maintains an existing situation. It maintains the way things work. Okay? An elected government wants to represent their interests, the people who elected them. Okay. And that, as I said in the last lecture, that Weber's very clear that bureaucracy does not cater for the disempowered. That bureaucracy works for people who have the resources to operate in this structure. It doesn't work for the mass of people who are unemployed, who are propertyless, who can't afford the lawyers that they can have to defend themselves if they get wrongly accused of a crime. Yes, they can have it. They have that equality in process, but substantial equality, democracy does not figure with that. Bureaucracy does not try and address that. It can't. And what's more, the very mass of people feeding into it, bureaucracy is doing everything possible to reduce that influence, okay, to protect itself, to maintain control. Bureaucracy is control. A large number of people opposing is a threat to that control. Okay. Okay, so tell you what, we're going to have a break at about 6:45. We'll have a 10-minute break. And hopefully this will not continue to be a problem. Okay, so Mitchell's argues, hang on, I've got one. Mitchell's argues that rule of democracy is in fact not possible. He laughs at the idea that, yes, someone asking a question? No. Okay. When you read Mitchell's, it's very clear that he's more a proponent of an elite theory of power, that some people are effective, some people are capable at ruling, but most people aren't. Most people aren't. The masses are not. That any illusion of any claim to democracy and rule of the masses is in fact just a complete con. It doesn't exist. Okay. Okay, hang on. Maybe I don't know if this is going to help. No, that doesn't help, but jeez. Okay. Okay, how about this? If we turn this around, ha, there we go. Ha. Let me arrange it. We're going back to the number one next week, and I will ask them to please come and fix it again. Okay, that's as good as I can do, sorry. Can you see? You might have to move. Is it okay? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's as good as I can do. And then, okay. So we'll just carry on hoping with this. Right. So he argues that there is no system in the world where it is possible to rule for the masses to rule, that inevitably, even if you say that this is a case of democracy, of participation, of proper consultation, it simply actually isn't happening. Okay, I think it's an issue with the HDMI. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know. And besides, what I think is the case is that, you know, the last week it was possible. One of the possibilities was there was a fault with my HDMI cable. I think there was a fault with my HDMI cable, in addition to the other problems that weren't the result of that. But that's really, it shouldn't be flickering. Yeah. Okay, so this is Michelle. She argues that it's absolutely impossible, that in every society there is in fact only an elite who rule, that this is the way that it's actually good, this is how it should be, and that historical class struggles are simply successive elites, that just because your government changes doesn't mean anything changes. You know, the choir master changes, but the song remains the same, that sort of thing. Okay. On the other hand, you have the socialists, for example, Buchanan, who would argue, in accordance with Marxist theory, that democracy is a bourgeois illusion. Yeah, that democracy is there to make the proletariat, to make workers believe that they have equal power, when in fact they don't have any power, and those who own capital control the state, and the state is nothing more than a mouthpiece for the bourgeoisie, for capital. Okay, so they in the first place have no illusion that democracy is possible in capitalism, but they claim that, well, they wouldn't say democracy, but they claim that in socialism, there will be no need for the state because everything will be socially owned and socially distributed, and it will be and this is also where Michelle's is quite nice, the dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay, that initially in that stage of transition, it will be a case of the proletariats taking over and doing away with the state. Okay. Well, this is it, because they're saying a dictatorship of the proletariat, that's a state in some form. That's an exercise of power, all right, undeniably. But they say that that's only a transitionary process. In time, there will be no need for a state because it will all be, there won't be any conflict that the state has to suppress. People will simply get along because they will be all equal and they will respect each person's individual contributions. In theory, yeah. Well, this is it. This is why Michelle says, well, the very idea of socialism is that you take all this property and that you nationalize it. It becomes everyone's property, which means that you're sitting with a large amount of resources, this concentrated resources, which by itself demands an even bigger state. Okay, that as soon as you have to decide who needs what is a fair basis to do it, and what claims are defendable and what are not, already that is a bureaucracy. There's no way you can do it without a bureaucracy. Okay. In fact, he says it's an even larger bureaucracy than capitalism requires. Okay, and he says, yep, instead of the mass of people, the people as a whole, the people shall rule. Instead of that happening, it's a case of the vanguard becomes the new political class that acts as the arms of the proletariat, that dictatorship of the proletariat. They're the ones who decide what the proletariat needs to have done, what they want done, and how this should take place. So in fact, it is quite clearly just a new political class that itself will operate to entrench its own position and to protect its own power in the future.
Back to the same.
So back to the same thing. Is nothing, no way that it can work, that socialism in the very act of that transition, of that nationalizing, of that socializing private property needs a bureaucracy, establishes a bureaucracy. There's no other way to do it. So that in the very success, it will collapse. Okay, this is more. No? Okay. All right. Okay. Share. Okay. Okay, we're just trying to get the slides to work. Okay. Am I sharing screen with everyone online?
Yeah, I actually see your summary of Michael's. I see your presenter screen. I see like your notes screen.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. No, that's great. Thank you. Okay. So in summary, Mitchell's argument is that it is inevitable that with the concentration of resources in any society, as a society develops, as they get bigger, that bureaucracy inevitably has to be established in order to maintain control, and that the interest of bureaucracy is to maintain itself. It's not to act, well, it is supposedly to act for the good of the people, right? But actually, if you look at the structure of bureaucracy, it is to establish a way of doing things that is reproduced over time, that is consistent, that is objectively implemented, and to respect existing hierarchies of power and differentiation of tasks. It is by its very nature conservative. It acts to conserve existing power, okay? Not to change it. And that even the purest idealist who attains power for a few years is unable to escape the corruption which the exercise of power carries in its train. Yeah, I know. Yeah. No. Yep. Yep. The comment is, even if we were to vote for the DA, it doesn't guarantee. In fact, Mitchell's would say they will do exactly what the ANC is doing. It is simply swapping the holders of power. They will continue. You know, it's just the elites are exchanging themselves. Yeah.
And so it doesn't really matter if it's a capitalist society or a socialist society. Either one of those things is going to almost take the bureaucracy regardless, because there's so many people in this space that need to be organized, essentially.
Yes, there's so many people. The question is, so there's so many people in the space that need to be organized. There's so much that needs to be controlled that it doesn't actually matter if it's capitalism or socialism either. Okay. Yeah, and Michel's is on the side of the socialists, although he is of the elitist perceptions. He doesn't see the possibility of the people ruling, although he thinks that as socialism it is a better way of ruling. But he certainly doesn't see it as being the rule of the people. No. He doesn't think, well, he argues it's just not possible. Okay. Yeah. As long as you have a mass number of people, you always need a political class. Yeah. Yes, what the class is immaterial. You can substitute this elite for that elite, but that's it. Yeah. Okay, but also remember that Michel sees that it really is actually that the best way of rule is for that small elite class to rule. He does not see it that the masses should even want to rule. They should realize that they are not able to rule. So it's not like he's questioning that. Oh, come on. Come on.
And you see that the position they chose is so accurate of experience.
People vote for ideals, yes. Mm-hmm. That, yeah, the ideal never actually comes through. The governments don't keep to their claims, they just become, yes. I don't know though that, I mean, yes, that is Michelle's argument, but I don't know if that's an adequate argument. You know, I mean, he is saying this is a result of the structure, you know, that it is always a leadership issue. He's saying it's a political issue, when in fact there are many other things to consider as well. You know, maybe it isn't just the fault of the fact that elites take over. Maybe he's right that elites always do have to take over. Maybe we are just idealists, but maybe there are other ways of doing things. One of the comments at the end of last week's lecture was, is there any other way apart from bureaucracy? Well, yes. On a small scale, yes. On a small scale, you can have participative engagement such that it is, there isn't a hierarchy of power, that power is actually equally shared. You can have organizations of equal power. Think of Stockville's. Stockville's don't have particular hierarchies. Unions at the level of the workshop, at the level of the factory floor, they don't have particular hierarchies. They elect people to stand as shop stewards. When they don't do their job, or when they don't like them, or when someone better comes along, that person is unelected. No one holds and monopolizes power. Cooperatives, again, you decide on almost like a little constitution of how you're going to operate, and every member has equal influence. Of course, that is where we now come on to looking at what Leach says, because Leach says, okay, one of the things he wants to do, he says, okay, so let's look at this idea of oligarchy, and let's start with the recognition that is not just bureaucracy that creates oligarchy, that in a collectively run, in a purely equal collectively run organization, you might still have a minority who actually in fact control how it works and monopolize power and prevent the rest of the people from exercising their rights. Okay. All right, so I think a good way to start with this, and I'm going to ask you a question just before we break. A good way to start with this is to think about what power is, right? Common way of understanding it is to say it's the ability to make someone do something that they wouldn't if it hadn't been for your interaction, or to not do something. All right. Now that's really, really broad. It might be a formal thing. It might be that I prevent you from, well, actually, no, that's a bad thing. Yeah, I prevent you from getting a passing mark. Yeah? It's, I have the authority to do something. You want to carry on with your studies. I do something that prevents it. Okay? Essentially, I don't give you the mark that's necessary in order to move on. It can be informal. It can be, you know, you can have someone persuade you to give them your phone. They can make a good argument for why your phone or some other item of yours is something that they need far more than you do. They could persuade you quite, you know, legitimately. You accept their argument, you agree with their reasoning, and you give them your phone freely. They may do it by threatening you. So you may give them your phone because they threaten you, or they threaten to do something if you don't comply with their wishes. That too is power. The influence is also power. It's if you didn't talk and listen to that person, you would never have heard the argument that you agree with and give them your phone. Okay? They influenced you. That is power. It's not illegitimate. Okay? Formal power as well. Formal power can be legitimate. Okay? It's an honest assessment of your work that I give you a low mark and so you fail. Okay? And you can't go on. But it can also be illegitimate. That is not a objective reflection of your work, that in fact I have threatened that if people don't give me nice Christmas presents, they will fail. Okay? Or I browbeat you into feeling so inadequate that you are unable to write anything or to learn anything because you are so browbeaten by me. Okay. Yes. Okay, yeah, and it's that. Okay, the comment was the student is in a supply management. Yeah, and the common story of what happens is that someone will say, well, I've been influenced to take that tender or distributor or supplier rather than you. And how does that sit? It's a person with power. They have formal power, yeah? But they are exercising it illegitimately. Even if they are really just persuading that person, they still don't have the right to make decisions over that issue. Yeah. There's policies and procedures, yeah. Okay. So just because it's formal doesn't mean that it's legitimate. It can be formal and illegitimate in areas that are not part of your remit, with means that you aren't acceptable, aren't legitimate. For example, bribery, or threatening someone, or promising to provide material benefits. Okay. There's several ways in which formal power can be legitimate and can overstep the bounds and become illegitimate. And similarly, with informal power, it can be legitimate. Your friend can persuade you that they need an item of clothing or that it looks better on them. Yeah? They can also browbeat you into it. They can also manipulate you and call you names and get other people to bug you, and yeah, that can also be illegitimate. All right. So to help you think about man whose name Marie, whose name I always forget, his study of Cosatu and his argument is that at the shop floor level, Cosatu is not an oligarchy. At the shop floor level, there's still a significant level of participative democracy. But at a national level, it is very definitely an oligarchy. Okay, so if we think about the different ways that power can be exercised, okay, because remember, oligarchy is rule of the few. So it's an exertion of power by a few in an illegitimate way. Okay. Okay. Yes. All right. So you could be looking at look, Luke's three faces of power. I think an easier way for the first one, the Leach paper says formal power. I think a far more explanatory way is to say open power. The one face, the first face, is open. You can see this power operating, okay? It's the power to make decisions. It might be the manager who makes decisions, okay? It's not hidden, it's out there in the open. It could be the gang leader who makes decisions, right? It might be legitimate, it might be illegitimate, but it's an open exercise of power. It's not hidden, everyone can see it. The other two faces of power are usually informal and far more hidden and difficult to identify. Yeah. They're usually also illegitimate as well. Okay. Well, actually, I don't know. They're not necessarily all illegitimate. Okay, the power of non-decision. So the first one is that decision making. Leach refers to it as formal power. I think a better way to refer to it is an open power. It's open, it's out there in the open, you can see it happening, all right? The second face of power is the power of non-decision. The power to decide what gets decided, right? So it's being able to set the agenda. Let's see. Okay, this isn't a case, but imagine if you could elect to have the book of readings that we provide or not, and that it was up to you, that if you took them, you were charged the B notes, and if you didn't take them, you wouldn't get charged the B notes, all right? Imagine that was possible, but the way that it's expressed is such a way that it looks like it's not possible. It looks like it's something that you can't decide. You can't elect to have the notes or not have the notes. It isn't an option that you can take, all right? That would be a case of concealing or rather shaping the decisions, what you think is open to negotiation, right? Probably a better way of thinking of it is that it's a way of influencing or shaping how you see a situation. So you think you have some rights, and in fact, you act within those rights because you think those are the only rights you have, when in fact you have more rights, but you don't know that, okay? Or there are decisions to be taken and you're not aware of them because they're taken somewhere else. You are making decisions in an environment where you don't know the lay of the land, okay? Where someone else or some other body is controlling your perception of what you have to work with, okay? Of the decisions you can take, of the likelihood of winning. All right, someone who says, oh, you're never ever going to pass if you take that subject, and influences you to that extent, where you don't take it, could be said, and of course you'd have to show that they had some interest or some benefit from this, but could be said to have made it seem that it was impossible, that was such a risky course of action that you shouldn't even consider it, okay?
Maybe parents.
Okay, an example, parents influencing children. Yes. I mean, we brought up, that's actually a very good example. Yeah, you socialize to believe that some things are not possible, that you are good at some things and lousy at other things, or that, yeah, it's the attitudes of your parents, how they evaluate your skills, what they consider to be worth praising, and what they consider to be skills that they should probably, that are useless, okay, or that you don't do well or shouldn't continue with, okay. Yeah, Okay, and that also comes very nicely into the third phase of power, which is more contentious. Okay, this third phase of power is to actually shape or transfer, impose particular values and ideals on a person or group of people that is opposed to their own true interests. Huh? Yes, cult leaders, yes. Okay, that's a good example. It's a difficult one. I mean, it draws on that idea of hegemony, okay, of institutionalized values. Okay, you can think, and I'm going to offend a whole lot of people here, and I'm apologizing right in the beginning, okay? Women who insist that their marriages or their relationships or their way in the world is equal. That they believe that it's equal is just so they believe that they don't get paid as much because they don't deserve as much. They have internalized the values of a patriarchal society so that they truly believe that they have some skills, but they're not skilled in those areas, that men are better at these things and women are better at these things. And the fact that one is valued more than the other, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? Women who don't see patriarchy, who insists that there's no such thing, who insists that men and women are perfectly equal. Okay, you can say that, I would say anyway, all right, would be a case where you would want to say, this is the third phase of power. This person has internalized so deeply these beliefs that make her undermine herself and prevent her from being able to live a full life, prevent her from being able to earn her own money or make her accept that she's not as worthy. And that's clearly not in her own interest. Yeah? But it's a tremendously difficult situation because if you look at Marxism, Marxism says the same thing. Workers have particular interests. The proletariat class have, and their interest is opposed to the interest of capital. Capital's interest is to extract maximum profit from workers. Workers' interest is to resist that. When they don't form unions, when they don't organize to overthrow capitalism, Marxism explains it as false consciousness and says they haven't yet seen themselves in their true sense. They haven't yet seen, they're not a class for itself yet. They may be a class, but they don't understand their true interests. Okay? And this is why you need trade union education. You need trade unions to be mobilizing people. This is why you need the vanguard. Okay? To educate workers about their true interests and that capitalism is against their true interests. And it's a tremendously difficult position to take. Because at what point do you say that, well, for a start, is it illegitimate? If you are not protesting an exercise of power, if the woman who accepts the unequal position is accepting it freely, you can't say that it's being imposed illegitimately. She's not making any attempt to withstand it. She is agreeing, just like you agreed with your friend that they deserve to have your phone and need your phone more than you do. Yeah? The fact that your parents think you're crazy and think that your friend is a nasty person who stole your phone is beside the point. In the bounds of your relationship, you freely gave, they persuaded you. And they didn't make claims that they were going to beat you up or anything else. So that third phase of power becomes very difficult. All right, now we're going to break for 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 7. It's currently on my watch, it's 10 to 7. What I'd like you to do is think about Marie's discussion of COSATU. The reasons why he says that they are oligarchic at the national level, and why he says that they are not oligarchic at the local level on the shop floor itself. Okay. What kinds of power is he highlighting? Okay. Any questions before we take a break? No. Okay. So 10-minute break. I'm going to leave the camera on, but I'm going to turn off the sound. Does anyone have the register? Great. Thank you. Has everyone filled it in? Great, thanks. There are 30 reading, so you will be able to pick them up from Bits Plus. But and they close at 6. Yeah, okay. And then I recorded the makeup lecture that we did on Saturday. Okay, oh, did you? Okay, great. What is your name? Itumeling, thank you. Great. Okay, so by my watch, it is now 8 o'clock. Okay, so what I'm showing here, there were some questions in the class about, is oligarchy illegitimate? And I was saying that when I do these slides, I can never, there are things like this quote. This quote I've moved from slide to slide and back again so many times. So it is quite possible that it needs to come earlier. So here it is. Okay, we'll come back to it. But just to give you an idea of where we're going, that oligarchy, this is Leach, and I think it's a very good, I think it's a very good definition of oligarchy. And the way that you can critique that is to ask yourself, well, what other kinds of authority that differs from this, is there reason to say that it's bad or illegitimate? Or, oligarchy is a statement of, it's a nasty classification. It means that you're not listening, that you are not responding to the people who you are meant to be representing. It means that you are exceeding your power. It's a bad thing. So let's think about, in what context is power exercised by minority bad?
Can I just ask something?
Sure.
Perfect example would be like the
the recent one, not Indonesia, Sri Lanka. Okay, the question was, what is an example of oligarchy? Yes, it would be a case of where a government that is holding power is not considered to have legitimate power.
The Russian government.
Yeah, for example, the Russian government. But okay, within that, it's a case of and this is where it becomes difficult, because you're now saying, well, is it legitimate, the rules, because they are exercising their rule. Okay, their rule being exercised in Ukraine is wrong. Okay, it is being fought against. So you can't say that it's an oligarchy. Okay, it's actively being fought against, and we don't know the outcome of that. If the outcome is that they continue to dominate, then you could say it is an oligarchy, an illegitimate expression of power. I mean, it's an illegitimate government, but it's not. Yeah, I don't know how you would apply this to whole governments.
China and Taiwan, where they don't recognize.
I don't know, because it's a case of there are illegitimate governments. Okay, oligarchy is something that is meant to that is said to emerge when a minority take over illegitimately. They impose their will. Now, you can't, yes, we can say that the USSR, the Russian government is a small number of people, but to what extent it is them and not the Russian citizens who are taking over Ukraine, okay? If it is a reflection of the will of their people, then it is one country at war with another. Okay. Yeah. I think it's, yeah, I think the key point here is that it's a minority and it's illegitimate. Okay.
Christine,
illegitimate. Yeah.
Perhaps Liberia. I mean, I'm not really 100% familiar with it, but I remember there being like Liberia originally it was a small group of people that were slaves from America that went there and then kind of like took over the country, and it was kind of like a bit of an oligarchy. Maybe that could be a good example.
Okay, that's okay. The question is, the example is Liberia. Okay, that Liberia, America says that they've never colonized, but they did colonize. They decided that after slavery was outlawed, movements to support slaves to find their own homeland, much like Israel, okay, that they had support to establish this country, this Liberia. So the slaves from America, they raised money, not all of them, but some of them, and they went and they settled in Liberia and they said, right, this is our country. Okay. Sounds awfully like settlers. Yep. Settlers, it's colonizing. It sounds like Israel. Okay. To say we've been hard done by, we're going to get together and we're going to have our own homeland. Yes, that was, there were people already living there, and it has wealthy mineral resources. To have another group of people come in, and a small group, and this we assuming, and I think rightly assuming, that it was relatively small compared to the number of people who might have been passing through Liberia and occasionally lived there, and imposed their will that this is their country now. Yeah. But I think it's difficult when it comes to governments because there are many other terms. And here is, my background is not political science. So there are other terms and classifications of other forms of power that are illegitimate. Okay. So, yeah, if we can just leave the question of governments and countries for a moment. Yeah. I mean, even the white state, apartheid. Yes, it was a minority, a white minority. Okay, but the government wasn't oligarchic because the whole white population was the minority that ruled, It wasn't a case of just the apartheid government. It was they had the support of all the white people. So I don't know, you couldn't call them oligarch. I mean, maybe you could probably claim that the white population was an oligarchy. But I'm sure that there are better terms for it in political science. Yeah. Okay. So the important part is that it's illegitimate, that it's a minority, and this is crucial for Leach, that it sustains over time and it overcomes resistance, that people resist and the will of the minority is reinforced. In Leach's view, people have to resist, because otherwise, how do you know that it's illegitimate? Yeah. There has to be evidence of illegitimacy, of a desire to do something other by the majority of people, and an inability to do so. You know, I want to go back to earlier slides where we go through his argument a little more slowly and methodically. Yeah? Oh.
It's legitimate in the sense that the supranational power gave to this country, but it's illegitimate to the people.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm asking, at what level then it's legitimate?
Okay, this is the difficulty, because on one hand, it's legitimacy is when people give it to you. Okay, so legitimate power is when people accept your authority. Legitimate authority is accepted. The other countries who wanted countries in Africa, who might have wanted Namibia, they agreed that Germany could have Namibia. Okay, so they accepted that decision. And they said that is a legitimate authority. Okay, then you've got the other side where the people who weren't involved in the decision, it happened somewhere else and was then imposed on them. They're not looking at those people. But you could also say, and this is it, that there has to be a standard that you judge. It can't be just if it's okay in your society, then it's okay, all right? That there are, in fact, some, at any point in time, there are universal understandings of what kind of power is legitimate and what kind of power is illegitimate. And at that time, it would be a case of, well, the world as a whole would not have agreed, would not have accepted that that was legitimate. But amongst that small clique of countries and powers, they thought it was legitimate, okay? But it isn't. There is an absolute here. There is a case of people are, yeah. The only way that that could have been legitimate was when they said that you have to assume that the people aren't equal. You have to assume either that the people of Namibia couldn't rule the country and needed the help of another, okay? In which case they are not capable, in which case you're saying something around that country is more capable, those people are more capable than those people. That's the basis on which it happened. And it's a case of that is illegitimate, and even at the time, that wouldn't have been accepted as a statement. Okay, in South Africa, it would have been accepted, but as a statement the world over, Black people are not equal to white people, would not have been accepted as truth. So, illegitimate. Yeah.
Organizations such as World Health become
well, it depends if we object. If we object and resist, whoops.
They say we must wear masks.
Okay, they say that we must wear masks. This is the question is we must all wear masks, and everyone in South Africa, or the majority of South Africans, disagree with that. Okay. Then it's a case of, well, okay, what is the scope of the World Health Organization's power? Okay, if you look at legitimacy, it is, do we subscribe to the World Health Organization? Yes, we are a signatory. If we weren't, that's a different story. But we have said, yes, we recognize your authority over these areas. Are they exercising their authority over an area that they are legitimately able to? Is it an area where they can, where they are required, that is their duty to operate? Are they using means that are unacceptable? I mean, I don't think the World Health Organization can force countries to do anything. I think the extent of their authority is to advise. They can't force. I mean, even when countries closed their borders and they said that is not necessary, it's an overreaction, it's counterproductive to everything about the virus, still countries kept their borders closed if they wanted to. Okay? So it's a case of, is there consent? Okay. And it might be consent of the governed, formal consent, or it might be the consent of the led, that informal, where someone is there's someone in your group of friends who is very persuasive, or people generally follow that person. And then its legitimacy also established into relation of what kind of power. I mean, the friend who everyone listens to and thinks is really good at political analysis, they listen to that person and that person can influence them around political analysis. But if that person now said, well, I also think that your clothing is horrid and you really shouldn't be wearing that, that is, no, you give them authority, you're accepting their authority, their influence in a particular area. You're not saying by virtue of being a political analyst that I respect, I'm going to now let you tell me how to raise my children. Okay? So even informally, there are bounds to the power that you give. I mean, you don't give it over everything. It is contained. And it's also, they are legitimate, they are acceptable means and unacceptable. You know, so the friend who's the political analyst, if they start calling you names or laughing or humiliating at you because you have a different view to them, that's illegitimate. To get people to agree with your analysis, because otherwise you're going to call them names, is no. The legitimacy they have is that their ideas are persuasive. That is the way that they can exercise it. They are clearly, well, it's in negotiating in the society that we live in, we have very clear ideas about what is unacceptable means of doing things. Okay? Bullying is unacceptable. Persuading someone? No, that's fine. Threatening someone? No. Okay, so, and then legitimacy is the outcome of democratic practice. That people typically say a decision is legitimate because it was taken democratically. Okay, so what you can see there is that there are both subjective and objective aspects to it. Subjective, because in the first place you're saying that there's consent, right? Now, the degree to which there's consent requires are these people consenting? Is there opposition? Is there resistance? Okay. That is a more subjective question. The legitimacy in terms of who may exercise power and the means that are acceptable, you can generally read that from the society. There's, yeah, as I said, that's clear enough. And when you get down to the democratic practice, there you have a clearly objective, structural way of assessing legitimacy, okay? That there are democratic practices, and that is an aspect of legitimacy, okay? What Leach is arguing is that you have to have more than just one of these. Okay. And a crucial part of that is that you have to be able to have evidence of consent or resistance. And it's that judging consent or resistance, because people only resist if, well, no, people are more likely to resist if they think that they have a chance of succeeding. If they don't believe they have a chance of succeeding, they are less likely to resist. However, you can still find or identify grudging consent, where it's not actually consent, but people are not objecting because they are afraid. Okay. They're afraid of retaliation by the person or by the political party or by the organization or the few people who are controlling this. Perhaps they are not resisting because they are being bribed to keep quiet. Then it comes back to the means that are acceptable in exercising. And that's something that you read from your society, not from the people. Okay, not from the people who are directly not resisting. Okay, if people are not resisting this because they are being bribed, well, in that society, is that a legitimate way? Is it generally considered legitimate for organizations, democratic organizations, to operate on the basis of bribery? No, right? So here you come back to, yes, you look at the society, but you also accept that there are established accepted ways of doing things and ways that are not accepted as legitimate. You know, no, you're not imposing them across centuries, just imposing them in this century. But they're there, all right? So in that sense, it's a case of, well, they're not resisting, but they're not resisting because illegitimate means are being used. However, they have to still show some indication that they wish to resist. Okay. If they are completely happy with the situation, that this is the only way that they are going to get the job is if you are in power and if they support you, well, then no, then they're not resisting. Then it's legitimate. They are accepting that they will do things for you on the basis of a contractual operation. And then you're down to, well, what is the norms in that organization? Is that accepted for an organization like that? Like, for example, a hospital. Okay? People who sell their organs. Yes, they freely decide to sell their organs, and someone else freely decides to buy their organs. But in hospitals, when it comes to human health, that organ thing is universally considered, no, you can't buy and sell organs. All right. It's in that kind of an organization, it's not permitted. Okay. All right, so once again, think of Marie. If we go back to that slide. Okay. And I asked you to think about Marie and what kind of power he was identifying, what kind of exercise of power that he was saying that structure is oligarchic or not oligarchic. What kind of power was he looking at?
Hi, Christine. I'm not sure if anyone's speaking that side.
No. Yeah. Okay.
I have more of a query, but if the question is, if you're saying the oligarchy is happening on a national level, but not on a shop level, in terms of the power, you were speaking about this, the transfer desires, the values, norms, beliefs of other people. Could, there's this kind of comment in his reading that says something about when asked to describe his politics in one word, he answered communism. I'm a communist. My lifestyle and thinking relates to the thinking of Marx, Lenin. So there's a if we're talking about values, norms, and beliefs, and there's that like kind of, would that be an example?
Yes, that is. That's a good example. Okay, the example is that when Marie is talking about, he asks, I think the General Secretary of COSATU to express his political beliefs, and he says, I'm a communist. This is what I believe. I believe in Marxist-Leninism. And Marie makes a big thing of the fact that COSATU pushes a very strong Marxist discourse. And workers, members of those unions, don't necessarily have a majority of people who are supporting SACP or supporting socialism. And he says that is an indication. Because of that, as one important reason, he says it's oligarchy. It's an illegitimate expression of power, exercise of power. And in terms of this, it would be, yes, as the person says, it is this kind of power that he's claiming. He's claiming that what COSATU is doing is transferring their values, norms, and beliefs, or trying to. Yep. Okay, problem with that, yes. Yes.
So they may vote again, big members, but they are also new members because they work in the line. So in that sense, I think for me, this confusion or this conflict is to be resolved. What do we want? What do we say these people are? Because in the union context, it's the working class versus the capitalist.
Yes.
But in the political affiliation, the Democrats. So how do we then say COSATU is an oligarchy? Because isn't it the Marxist framework, the socialist framework? It's taking classes. That's what you hear. The operating from a class perspective, the operating from a political perspective. And these members are dual members of democracy, the dual members of the Marxist.
Right. All right. So the union itself, that the unions that those members are part of, are the reason for their being is because the working class needs to be protected. The working class, their members, know it's not like they've hidden this idea that they are for socialism and against capitalism. Unions establish themselves and fight on the basis that there's this unequal power and that capitalism needs to be contained, that capitalists have interests that are opposed to that of workers. That is the reason why workers are part of that union. Their political affiliation, whether they want socialism in their government or whether they want the SACP in their government or whether they want the ANC in their government, is a completely different issue. But they've joined a union that organizes on the basis of workers' rights, as opposed that sees workers' rights as being in conflict with the interests of capitalism. Yeah. Okay. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yes. Okay, so yes. Okay, but the same person, I must really learn some names here, adds to that and says, but what is also illegitimate is the movement of COSATU, that's, yes, they establish the authority within that sphere of trade unions. To then also be influencing the government is an extension of a stretch of their influence, that they shouldn't see themselves as having that role, as influencing government, is that what you're saying? Okay. Yes, okay. Yeah.
You see the union at the bottom. The union at the bottom. The individual union are fighting worker for. COSATU, as a representative of all the unions, right, might be looking at policy issues and how they can influence. I think the strategy would be how to influence the government in favor of labor at policy level. So I still somehow think that it's an unfair discussion that Marie brings, because if you really think about the roles that these guys play, COSATU does not come. You won't find COSATU negotiating at an employer's desk. COSATU will never sit across from an employer. NUMSA will sit across from an employer. SATU will sit across from an employer. So those are on the second floor. But COSATU deals with NUMS and deals with SATU. It does not deal with the worker. So this whole argument for me is flawed from that perspective.
Yes. It's not, COSATU is not there. It doesn't, its identity is not to represent workers. It is a federation of trade unions. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So that is one of the bases on which Marie argues that they are oligarchic. And I agree with you. I don't think it's possible to defend it. Yeah. It's, I mean, first, yeah, I mean, the reason that I was thinking of is because, well, you know, it's not like people really are becoming, they're not taking over their identities. You know, the fact that COSATU has a Marxist-Leninist discourse doesn't mean that it forces people to have that too. You know, there's no indication. The workers are members of unions in COSATU are quite able to say, no, we don't. You know, we do believe that trade unions are the best way to get our interests protected, but no, we aren't members of the SACP. They don't have a problem saying that. So it's not like they are actually transferring desires, values, norms, and beliefs against their real interests. And then, of course, you have the real interest part that you would have to then also defend. That the fact that people don't necessarily want to support SACP or socialism doesn't mean that they don't know their interest, or that they do support socialism doesn't mean that they don't understand their own interests. Yeah. Okay. Other reasons that Marie gives for saying that COSATU at a national level is oligarchic. It's a small number of elites at the top. And he says that once they are elected into positions of leadership, it is very difficult to, they then control or dominate the mobilizing structures, that they then use the structures of COSATU to lobby more support, so that in effect they remain in positions of power and there isn't an equal opportunity for people who are not elected to be elected in the future. Okay, but here again, I mean, your point is very true. COSATU is a federation that the members are members of unions. The unions are part of the federation. You know, you could argue that COSATU is not representing the unions in that alliance, but that's not what he's arguing. He's saying that COSATU isn't representing the members of those other unions, which is not the case. That's not their power. They don't represent them. They are representing many different unions. Okay, but that is an argument. That is the argument that he provides for saying that they are oligarchic. Okay, so the NEDLAC agreements, that there's no, he argues about the NEDLAC agreements that workers don't know what NEDLAC is and that they don't know when the meetings, that they don't know what things are discussed. Which kind of power would he be claiming there that is being illegitimately exercised? The non-decision, yeah. That's power of setting the agenda of things that you can talk about and things that you can't. Withholding information, influencing people's assessment of the context that they're acting in. But here again, yeah, I mean, the fact of who actually is COSATU representing, who is their yeah, who are they representing? This is it. You know, is it the unions? Or is it the workers on the floor? And yeah. Because in that sense, it's a case of, well, the individual unions should be talking back. If the unions aren't hearing about decisions taken at NEDLAC, then that's an issue. But the members of those unions not hearing is an issue of the unions, not, you know, it's not COSATU's responsibility. He also he makes another statement around the influence of COSATU over government policy. Okay. And he never says why. He just seems to assume that everyone agrees that COSATU shouldn't be doing that. He says it's inhibiting democracy that they do that. Okay. In terms of that, sorry, actually, we go forward. On what basis would he then be saying that their exercising authority in that case is illegitimate, exercising authority in the alliance? We go back here. Didn't want to go that far back. Okay. Comes down to legitimacy, that he's saying that COSATU is exercising power in areas that it doesn't have legitimate influence. And this again is well, it's not the same thing, but it is a case of, okay, so government was elected, an ANC government was elected with an alliance behind them. To then say that it is illegitimate to influence that government is to say, well, that's, you know, illegitimate on the basis of what? That isn't why people voted for them? No, everyone was aware of that. So they did vote for them knowing that they were in an alliance that had impact. Okay? You could perhaps argue that, well, governments generally don't allow trade unions to influence their policies, but they do. So on that basis, you know, it's not clear that that is oligarchic or illegitimate. Yeah. 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 It's woolly and it doesn't actually, yeah, yes. Okay, yes. If he had looked at the way in which individual unions come forward and act on the mandate that they have from their members, the workers, then you can make statements, yes, about that union. You can't make statements about COSATU. Yeah, as you say, the contractual relationship is that the workers elect office bearers within a union, their union. They don't elect COSATU. Those union office bearers then represent the workers' interests at a higher level. And it comes back to consent. In the surveys, is there a sense that workers feel that their union is not representing them? Do they feel that there's inadequate consultation? Do they object to the decisions being taken? Do they want to be consulted on every single decision? Or are they happy to say, look, we elect those people, they can act for us? Yeah. Yes. Marikana is a different story, yes. But that was it. That was a contest within, you know, between unions. Mm. Okay, so come back to this slide. That you actually have to be demonstrating, this is Leach's argument, that you have to be demonstrating both an illegitimate exercise of power, whether that be that you don't have the power and you are exercising it, you don't actually have that consent, whether it be that your scope in which you are exercising this power is outside the scope of what you have it. You know, I listen to your ideas because of your political analysis, not because of your beliefs on child rearing. Yeah, all the means in which that power is being exercised. Persuasion is fine, convincing me is fine, but calling me names so that I don't object, or calling me names so that I agree with you because I'm scared of how you make me look in front of everyone else, that isn't legitimate. Yeah? That's not freely given consent. Yeah. Okay. The second point, I think, is I struggle to get my head around that. And I understand Leach's argument is that there might be unintentional illegitimate use of power. Okay. So that leaders operate in a way that they unintentionally misrepresent, or they unintentionally use a means that is regarded as illegitimate and not cool, right? That seems to be his argument, that you then have to account for it. You can't call them oligarchic at that point because they are not intending to be that. So that you have to see, what do they do when it's clear that they are opposed, when it's clear, very clear to them that the people that they are meant to be representing, okay, democratically elected from, when it's clear that they are not happy, do they then continue, do they then use their power to prevent and to quell opposition? Or do they, at the point where it's clear that the membership is not happy, step back and say, okay, you're not happy, re-elect other people, I'll stand down? I don't know why he is making such a thing of that that the minority is able to retain its position over time against the wishes of the majority. What do you think? Look, I like it because it gives us more to critique and more to be able to look at something and say, well, is this oligarchic or not, rather than just throwing around oligarchy like an insult. Okay. But yeah, at one stage he says, hang on, let me get to that slide. If the minority is unable to use the resources that it has, if they're just ineffectual, then they're not an oligarchy because they're ineffectual. It's almost like it has to be a deliberate, it has to be an act. It can't just be something that happens along the way because no one opposes it. Okay? He's saying that they actually need to be actively doing something. Let me get to it. Yes. Yeah, they didn't have the legitimacy to influence government. They used means that were illegitimate in terms of how bodies and wealthy people can influence government. I mean, they do influence government, but the means that they used were unacceptable, and the extent of the authority that they exercised was unacceptable. But, and you get onto the point about, was there resistance? Yes, there was resistance when we heard about it. Okay? Yeah. Did we try and resist, and did they manage to use their power to subdue us so that we couldn't actually, they carried on exercising the illegitimate power even though we were fighting against it? No. Okay? We exercised the power and they tried a little bit, but they left. Quite, yeah. They didn't continue on. And yeah, this is that I find difficult with him. That, okay, I understand that it must actually do something to exceed the bounds of legitimate power. It can't just be a misunderstanding, okay? It must actually want to overcome resistance. I mean, if they're wanting to rule illegitimately, well, then let's see them wanting to rule rather than saying, oh, I'm illegitimate, okay, I'll step down. All right. So I can kind of see that. It's the resistance. He puts such an emphasis on whether or not you can see resistance. Yeah. Look, it's useful. But you don't have to accept everything that he says. As long as you get the general, well, as I said, this is not prescribed, but this is intended to help you come to grips with what people mean by oligarchy when they are required to actually defend it. Because, I mean, and the more stuff that I read, the more often it is just thrown around as a term that you know, it's like an insult to anyone. You know, it's like reactionary. When I first went to varsity, and the whole political environment was very political at those. It was late 80s. Reactionary was a terrible insult. You just call everyone reactionary. And I had no idea what it meant, but it was a horrible word, and people would get very upset. And it was an insult. But it's that you know, there's so much. Yeah. You can't say, and this again is, and it also relates to other things in Marie's paper around democracy, that you have to have another government before you can say that it's truly democratic. You know, it's like, I don't know if you can, you know, I kind of feel that that's ignoring and downplaying the agency of everyone who elects, you know, of the vote. It's undermining the votes and saying, well, no, actually, you just don't know what your real interests are, or you didn't freely vote. Yeah, he wants a pattern of minority control over time. And he's quite happy to say that even if there has been an exercise of illegitimate power, if it hasn't been used effectively, well, I suppose, yes, there's a changing situation. If it's not used effectively, then what we're saying is that that minority is not actually controlling. They are being opposed, and the people opposing are managing to get their viewpoint heard. Okay, we are finishing far earlier than I thought. So just yeah, okay, before we break, think about these three faces of power. Okay, now this is what we mean when we say to you, is this concept, how good is this concept? Evaluate the usefulness of this concept for explaining XYZ. Okay, Luke's concept of three faces of power, how does it help you? Is it something that you would like to, is it a concept that you can use in the future to explain and to understand and question whether power is being exercised and whether it's legitimate or illegitimate? And what do you think of the point of Marie? I mean, apart from, you know, that he's misunderstanding Cosatu, but his emphasis on the ideological position. Do you think that that is an exercise of power that you can say is illegitimate? Yeah, think back to, the woman who does not think that she is being exploited, does not think that she's oppressed. Who are we to tell her that she is? Okay, questions. You seem much less engaging in this room than you were in the other.
Yes.
Why? Oh, yeah, it's cold. Yeah, no, I remember this being an issue. I don't feel it whatsoever, but yeah, every year that I've taught in this venue, it's cold. Sorry? Controlling the aircon is, I think once I found a way to get in there, and this is again around bureaucracies, what you're meant to be able to do and what you're not. There was some unhappiness that my card actually opened that thing. But you're meant to be able to control everything from this main desk. But aircon does not come up. I mean, I can control the lights, but not aircon. But there's probably another way to do that. Maybe in our regular venue, which is number 1 down there, it won't be so bad. Okay. Yeah. The old room. You want to go back to the old room? I want the interaction that I had with you in the old room, but I don't want that kind of hassle. Yeah. Yeah. Having slides is not always, it gives a structure to the lecture that can be quite confining. Yeah.
Christine, we have some questions in the
in the chat. Okay, I have questions in the chat, so let's see. Okay. Oh, I hate this damn transcript. Let me turn it off. Show notes. Okay, right. All right. So the first one I see is Gabrielle asking, as South Africa, we might have subscribed to WHO, but what if I didn't vote for the current government and I do not subscribe to WHO's recommendation? Is WHO's power illegitimate then? Well, in a democratic system, the fact that you don't vote for the current government doesn't mean that you can then not accept them. It's like the way that it's a system of everyone votes, and yeah, it's by definition. Okay. And this is the other thing Leach says. He says you can stop at the point if it's not democratic. If the structure isn't democratic, you can say then it freely gives, then it is formally allowed that a minority control. Yeah, so the question of whether or not it's oligarchic doesn't even come into it. But let me see if, okay, so yeah, you didn't decide, you didn't have a say in whether or not you subscribe to WHO's authority, and you didn't have a say on whether or not you believe this. But you've given the right of that decision to other people because you have a government. Yeah. Yeah. The people who attend online, you don't have to sign in because I get a register of everyone who attends. Okay, anything else? Yeah?
Feels like there's a lot of things to consider whether to decide which. Where could we dig a little bit? Because I don't know if consulted leaders do they run. Where do we find more information on that?
Yeah. Then it goes, yeah. Ah,
Like a constitution.
yeah. Yeah.
And there's a website, it's a history,
Mm.
like 1946 information going. Use the thing.
Mm. And yeah, and also bear in mind that you can focus on some part of the survey. Maybe some of the survey questions ask questions directly related to COSATU. Does COSATU, is this good, of the members? The book that was written that pulls apart that survey is available. It's open source. So I'll put that up as well. Yeah. And you'll have more access to more of that survey stuff. No. Yeah. 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 And essentially you expected to do it from the resources that we've given you, but the fact that it's not enough information is a very good claim. And you could write a paper saying, well, I don't have enough information because to make this decision, I need to know X, Y, Z, and that information isn't available yet. Yeah. I mean, also remember that what you're doing is writing 600 words maximum, okay, for these reflection pieces. When it comes to, if you wanted to write on this topic, if you were doing your assignment on this particular aspect, I would suggest it's not a good reflection of what you know. That if there isn't much that you can talk about there, then don't spend too much time on it unless you find other resources. I mean, if you went and found other resources, you could make this a focus of your assignment. Okay, yeah. I don't remember either, but I have it here. The slides, of course, I had it on that. Yes. Come on, where's Paul? Okay, let me exit this. Okay, that's not going to be recent. One. There we go. Yes, there we go. Okay, shall I show that? Oh, no, you can see it. Good. All right, so the question for the reflection piece this week is, if trade unions in South Africa are bureaucratic, do they become oligarchies? Is that an assumption that we can make, that bureaucracies inevitably become oligarchies? And does this mean that they're no longer representative of workers? So you could say, well, decisions are being taken by a minority, but workers still have representation at some levels. Okay. You could say at those high levels of union management structures, actually, that doesn't really impact much on workers' day-to-day concerns. That what workers are worried about is the day-to-day activities rather than the big picture policy in the future and future directions. And to some extent, we can't just, well, what I feel is that it's unreasonable to say that bureaucracies are just bad, because, you know, yes, there are other ways of organizing, but bureaucracies have values. Some, yeah, in many areas they are valuable. And I think it's unreasonable to expect large organizations to not be bureaucratic. Yeah. Okay, people. So we will end early, and hopefully next week we will be back in number 1 and everything will work and my cable won't be funny. But it's fine now. Yeah. Okay. All right. So everyone online, I'm going to stop recording unless there are more questions.
No, thank you. Bye, guys.
Okay. All right. Bye. Thank you.